Dorothy Ann Whitcomb was 68 years old the winter the storms came early. She lived in the small white clapboard cottage that crouched in the shadow of the old Cape Elizabeth lighthouse, the one the Coast Guard had automated back in 1989, but never quite abandoned. The Park Service kept the tower painted, the lens turning, the grounds trimmed. But the keeper's cottage belonged to her now, left to her by her husband Samuel in his will, along with the words, "Take care of the light, Dottie. It's the only thing that never leaves." She had taken care of it for 43 years. The cottage sat on a narrow spit of land where the Atlantic threw itself against black rocks day and night. In summer, tourists came to photograph the twin towers of the lighthouse. Portland Headlight got all the postcards, but Cape Elizabeth was the real sentinel, the one that warned ships away from the ledges that had claimed hundreds of lives. In winter, the tourists vanished, and it was just Dorothy, the gulls, and the wind that sounded like a woman weeping. She woke every morning at 5:15, before the automated light shut itself off at sunrise. Old habit. Samuel had kept the 4 to 8 watch for 30 years. She had kept the cottage warm for him. She made coffee in the same percolator they'd bought in 1979, the one with the chipped blue handle. She drank it black, standing at the kitchen window that looked straight at the tower. The light swept across the water in slow, deliberate arcs, white and steady, the way Samuel had always insisted it should be. People in town thought she was a little strange, living out there alone. The cashier at the IGA in South Portland asked every week if she needed anything delivered. The minister at the Congregational Church invited her to the senior luncheons. Her sister Ruth in Florida sent worried emails. "Come south, Dot. You're too old to be rattling around in that drafty place." Dorothy always answered the same way. "I'm fine. The light needs watching." The truth was simpler and more complicated. The light didn't need her anymore. It hadn't needed a human hand since the day they installed the new bulb and the computer that turned it on and off. But she needed it, needed the rhythm of it, needed the excuse to stay. Because 44 years ago, on a night much like the ones that came every November, her only child, her son Caleb, had gone out in their lobster boat with Samuel and never come home. Caleb was 19, tall like his father, with Dorothy's dark hair and quick laugh. He'd finished high school the previous June and was supposed to leave for the University of Maine in January on a partial scholarship for marine biology. He loved the ocean the way other boys loved cars or girls. Loved it so much he couldn't stay away even when the weather turned. That night, the forecast had called for gale force winds by morning. Samuel had wanted to pull the traps early. Caleb insisted on going along. "One more haul before the storm, Dad. We'll be back before dark." Dorothy had stood on the porch in her old red coat, watching their running lights disappear into the fog. She'd waved until she couldn't see them anymore. They never came back. The boat was found 3 days later, smashed against the rocks near two lights. No bodies, just pieces of fiberglass, and the orange life ring with Whitcomb stenciled on it in black letters. Samuel was 42, Caleb was 19, Dorothy was 24. The town held a memorial service at the lighthouse. The Coast Guard sent a helicopter to drop a wreath into the water. People brought casseroles and pies to the cottage for weeks. Then they stopped coming. Life went on for everyone except her. She stayed, took the job the Park Service offered, groundskeeper and unofficial docent, lived on Samuel's pension and the small salary they paid her to mow grass and answer tourists' questions, raised no more children, kept no pets, let the second bedroom stay exactly as Caleb had left it. Lobster buoys hanging from the ceiling, posters of Jacques Cousteau on the walls, his high school graduation tassel still on the dresser. Every storm season, she climbed the tower alone and sat in the lantern room, watching the waves the way she had watched for their running lights that night. She talked to them both, Samuel about the weather, Caleb about the Red Sox or the price of bait. She never cried anymore. The tears had run out somewhere around year 15. But guilt? That had stayed fresh as the salt air. The winter of 2025-2026 was the worst in 20 years. Storm after storm rolled in from the North Atlantic, one barely gone before the next arrived. Power lines went down, roads flooded, the town closed school for a week straight. Dorothy kept the generator running and the pantry stocked. She was used to it. But on the night of January 12th, the wind hit 70 miles an hour sustained, gusting to 90. The tower groaned like an old man trying to stand. Dorothy lay awake listening to it, remembering another night when the wind had sounded exactly the same. At 2:17 a.m., the power failed. The automated light kept turning, battery backup, but the cottage went dark. Dorothy lit the kerosene lantern Samuel had kept for emergencies and carried it to the kitchen. She sat at the table with a cup of tea gone cold, staring at the tower through the window. That was when she saw the flashlight beam inside the lantern room. Someone was in the tower. The door at the base was supposed to be locked. The Park Service had changed the locks years ago and given her the only key. She kept it on a hook by the back door. Her heart hammered. Kids, probably. Teenagers looking for a place to drink or smoke or make out. They did that sometimes in summer, but in this weather, no one was that stupid. She pulled on her boots and Samuel's old yellow oilskin coat, took the big mag light from the drawer, grabbed the key. The wind nearly tore the door from her hand when she stepped outside. The rain came sideways, stinging her face like birdshot. She fought her way across the gravel path to the tower door. It was ajar, chain cut clean with bolt cutters. She pushed inside and started up the iron stairs, 187 steps, lantern in one hand, flashlight in the other. Halfway up, her knees burned. She was 68, not 24, but she kept climbing. The beam of light swept past the windows again. She heard voices, young, scared. She reached the watchroom just below the lantern. 2 kids, a boy and a girl, maybe 16, huddled against the wall, soaked to the skin. The boy had a cheap headlamp strapped to his forehead. The girl was crying. "What in God's name are you doing up here?" Dorothy's voice cracked like a whip over the wind. The boy jumped. We didn't think anyone lived here. We just needed someplace dry." "You cut the lock. You could have killed yourselves getting here in this gale." The girl sobbed harder. "We're sorry, ma'am. We didn't know." Dorothy looked at them closer. The boy had a split lip. The girl's eye was swelling shut. Their clothes were too thin for January. She sighed, anger draining away. "Come on, downstairs. Cottage is warm." They followed her down without argument. In the cottage kitchen, she made them sit at the table, gave them towels, put water on for cocoa. The boy's name was Tyler. The girl was Kaylee. They went to South Portland High. They'd run away from home. Tyler's stepfather had hit him. Kaylee's mother was drunk again and screaming. They thought the lighthouse would be empty. Dorothy listened without interrupting. When they finished, she said, "You can stay till morning. Storm's too bad to go anywhere. Then we'll call someone." Tyler shook his head. "No cops, please." Dorothy thought of Caleb at 16, how he'd hated authority, how he trusted the sea more than any adult. She nodded once. They slept on the couch under quilts she pulled from the cedar chest. Dorothy sat in Samuel's chair by the fireplace until dawn, watching them breathe. In the morning, the storm had passed. The sky was washed clean, the sea still angry but no longer murderous. Dorothy made pancakes. Tyler ate 6. Kaylee barely touched hers. After breakfast, Dorothy said, "I'm going up the tower to check the lens. You can come or stay." They came. The lantern room smelled of ozone and salt. Sunlight poured through the glass, turning the prisms into rainbows on the floor. Tyler stared, mouth open. "It's beautiful," he whispered. Dorothy told them how the light worked, how the Fresnel lens bent the beam 20 miles out to sea, how Samuel had polished every prism by hand every week, how the light had saved Spring came late. Ice lingered in the coves until April. Dorothy planted peas and lettuce in the small garden behind the cottage, the way she had every year since Caleb was small. In May, a letter arrived. No return address, just her name in careful block letters. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper. Mrs. Whitcomb, thank you for not turning us in. Kaylee and me are okay now. I got a job at the boat yard after school. She's living with her aunt. We think about the lighthouse all the time, about what you told us. I'm sorry about your son and husband. I can't imagine. If it's okay, can we come visit sometime? Just to see the light again. Tyler. Dorothy read it 3 times. Then she wrote back on her good stationery. Tyler, and Kaylee, if she's there, you are welcome anytime the gate is open. Bring warm clothes. The wind never really stops. Dorothy Whitcomb. They came the last Saturday in May, brought a homemade apple pie Kaylee's aunt had taught her to bake. They helped Dorothy weed the garden. Tyler mowed the grass with the old push mower. Kaylee swept the watchroom. Before they left, Tyler asked if they could climb the tower one more time. At the top, he pulled something from his backpack, 2 small green glass bottles with cork stoppers. I read online that sailors used to send messages in bottles, he said. We wrote some for your son and husband, if it's okay. Dorothy's throat closed. She nodded. They each wrote a note on scraps of paper, rolled them tight, tucked them into the bottles. Then they stood at the railing and threw them as far as they could into the surf below. The bottles flashed green in the sun before disappearing. Kaylee whispered, I hope they find them. Dorothy whispered back, they already did. The kids came every weekend that summer. Tyler learned how to trim the grass around the tower foundation the way the Park Service liked it. Kaylee painted the railing on the cottage porch a fresh white. Dorothy taught them how to make fish chowder the way Samuel had, thick with haddock and potatoes, no cream. In July, Tyler got his learner's permit. He drove Dorothy's old pickup to the grocery store for her when her arthritis acted up. Kaylee read aloud from the stack of library books Dorothy kept on the kitchen table. They never talked about running away again, but sometimes, late in the evening when the light came on, they climbed the tower together and sat quietly, watching the beams sweep the dark water. One night in August, Tyler asked, Do you still feel guilty? Dorothy thought before answering. Some days more than others. Guilt's like the tide, comes in, goes out, but it always leaves something behind. Kaylee said, My mom's in rehab now, 3rd time. I used to think it was my fault, that if I'd been better, she wouldn't drink. Dorothy reached over and took the girl's hand. It's never the child's fault. They sat in silence until the stars came out. November brought the first nor'easter of the season. The forecast was dire. Hurricane-force gusts, 20-foot seas, storm surge. The town evacuated low-lying areas. The Park Service called Dorothy to say they were closing the lighthouse grounds to visitors. She stayed. Tyler and Kaylee were juniors now, busy with school and part-time jobs. They texted every day. When the storm warnings went up, Tyler called. You're not staying, are you? I always stay. Mrs. W., it's bad. They're saying worst since '91. I've seen worse. He was quiet a moment. Then, I'm coming out there. No, roads will flood. I'll be careful. He hung up before she could argue. He arrived at dusk in his aunt's old Subaru, chains on the tires, brought sandwiches and a thermos of coffee. Kaylee couldn't come. Her aunt wouldn't let her out in the storm. They sat in the cottage kitchen listening to the wind howl. Power flickered but held. The light kept turning. At midnight, the surge came higher than expected. Water lapped at the foundation of the cottage. The gravel path disappeared. Tyler looked scared for the first time since the night Dorothy found him in the tower. We should go up, Dorothy said. Higher ground. They carried the lantern, blankets, the emergency radio, climbed the 187 steps slowly in the dark. In the lantern room, the wind screamed around the glass. The tower swayed slightly, something Dorothy had felt only twice in her life. They spread blankets on the floor and sat with their backs to the wall. Tyler said, "I'm glad I'm here with you." Dorothy smiled in the dark. "Me too." The radio reported downed trees, flooded roads, power out from Kittery to Rockland. They listened to the Coast Guard rescuing fishermen off Portsmouth. At 3 a.m., the eye passed overhead. Sudden silence. Stars visible through the glass above them. Dorothy stood and looked out. The water had receded slightly. The light still turned, steady and sure. Tyler joined her at the window. "It didn't go out," he said. "It never does." He was quiet a long time. Then, "I want to join the Coast Guard after graduation. Search and rescue." Dorothy's heart twisted. "It's dangerous work." "I know, but someone has to do it. Someone has to bring people home." She thought of Caleb, who'd wanted to study the sea, not fight it. Thought of Samuel, who'd kept the light so others could find their way. She put her arm around Tyler's shoulders. "You'd be good at it." Dawn came gray and exhausted. The storm moved north. Power returned by noon. The roads were passable by evening. Tyler left with a hug and a promise to text when he got home. Dorothy stood on the porch watching his taillights disappear, the same way she'd watched Samuel and Caleb all those years ago. But this time, the boy came back. The years that followed were the gentlest Dorothy had known since 1982. Tyler graduated in 2027 and enlisted. Kaylee went to community college for nursing. They both came home every leave, every break. Tyler brought his Coast Guard buddies to see the lighthouse. Kaylee brought her new boyfriend, then her fiancé, then her baby daughter named Anne after Dorothy. Dorothy turned 70, then 75. Arthritis slowed her, but the kids, now young adults, kept the grounds trimmed, the porch painted, the cottage warm. In the spring of 2031, the Park Service announced plans to fully decommission the Cape Elizabeth Light. New LED beacons on offshore buoys made the old tower obsolete. They would keep it as a historic site, but the light would go dark. Dorothy thought it, wrote letters, organized petitions, spoke at town meetings. Tyler, home on leave, stood beside her in uniform. The town rallied. The light stayed on. That summer, Dorothy's heart began to falter. Doctors in Portland said congestive heart failure. Manageable, but progressive. She kept climbing the tower as long as she could. One October evening, with the air crisp and the leaves turning, Tyler and Kaylee drove out together. They found her in the lantern room, sitting in Samuel's old chair, watching the sunset paint the water gold. "I'm tired," she said simply. They sat with her until the light came on automatically at dusk. Tyler said, "We have something to tell you." Kaylee held up her left hand, a simple gold band. "We got married last week. Quiet ceremony at the courthouse. Wanted you to be the first to know." Dorothy smiled, eyes shining. "I'm honored." Tyler added, "And we're buying the cottage from the Park Service. They're selling it private now that it's historic. We'll keep it in the family." Dorothy looked at them, at these two children she'd found in a storm, now grown and choosing to stay. She reached out and took their hands. Then the light will have someone to watch it after all. Winter came early again. Dorothy's heart grew weaker. In January 2032, she caught pneumonia, spent 2 weeks in the hospital. Tyler and Kaylee took turns at her bedside, read to her from Caleb's old marine biology textbooks, played recordings of the sea. On the morning she died, the nurse called them at 5:15 a.m. The automated light had just shut off for the day. They drove to the cottage through fresh snow, climbed the tower one last time with her ashes in a simple cedar box. At the top, they opened the east-facing window, the one that looked out over the exact spot where Samuel and Caleb had vanished. Tyler scattered half the ashes into the wind. Kaylee scattered the other half. The ashes caught the first rays of sunrise and glittered like diamonds before drifting down to the waiting sea. Tyler whispered, "Fair winds and following seas, Mrs. W." Kaylee added, "We'll keep the light on." They stood there until the sun was fully up. Years later, visitors to Cape Elizabeth Lighthouse would sometimes meet an older couple giving tours, an ex-Coast Guard swimmer with salt and pepper hair, and a nurse with kind eyes and a toddler on her hip. They would tell stories about the woman who kept the cottage for 50 years, who saved 2 runaway kids in a storm, who taught them that grief doesn't have to be the end of the story. And if you climb the tower on a quiet evening just after sunset, you could still see the light turning, steady, sure, guiding strangers home. Because someone was always watching. The light never went out. If you enjoy the content, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more amazing videos.